Hi everyone. First off, I just want to say thanks to everybody's positive feedback on our video where we talked a little bit about family history and showed a few family heirlooms. So because you were so excited about that and everybody said it was interesting, I'm assuming you were being, when you said you'd like to hear more stuff, you meant it. So here we are. We have more things and I thought we'd show them to you. This is really nice. First off, I got this picture from my niece for Christmas and it's antique, but this is Sandy. She inherited this, and it was my grandmother's, and it's one of those, is it treadle? Is that what it's called?
It's a treadle sewing machine.
Sewing machine, one of the singers, and her brother-in-law actually redid it. It was kind of beat up, and he completely redid it and made the wood shine, so it's got these cool little drawers. We've got these handles are fabulous.
There's something in the drawers.
And there are some in the drawers. Look, that one's empty. But look how beautiful that is. So the sewing machine's in there, and I'm not going to move everything. But so that is probably a good 100 years old. And because we got such great comments back, I just thought I'd give some tips for you who are doing your family history. Here's some things I do to, when I get stumped or hit a wall for family history, one of the things I do is if my ancestor isn't showing me in any of the records, I can't find that person's parents, I actually will go through a sibling if I can find a sibling. And sometimes you will have siblings come up even without the parents, and I've had that before. And so I'll go through a sibling to see if I can, and it's actually worked for me on a few occasions where I've pulled up their parents through a sibling. So there's that. There's also newspapers.com. It has years, I mean decades and probably centuries worth of newspaper articles, and it does have a fee. It's for the first 7 days you can have a free trial, and I don't know what the fee is. I don't even think it's that expensive, but you can find old articles, which would probably bring up obituaries. For a friend I was helping, I found some, not through newspapers.com, but the other tip I have for that is just to Google their name, and this is what I did. I found an old newspaper article on, I think this person's great-grandfather in about 1909, and he was murdered, and they didn't know who did it, so the article was just there. So newspapers.com for old archives, you might be able to find obituaries. You might be able to find articles just talking about whether they got some kind of an award or if they were involved in a crime, or just Google their name and you may pull up old articles that way and then go through their siblings. But here's another one, findagrave.com, all one word, findagrave.com. It has millions of photos, actual photos of headstones across the country, and they may be international now even. And you can go, if you do a search for that state, in that state, and just even by last name sometimes, or specific names, you can pull up people's headstones from years ago. In fact, I had one situation where I had, the date was coming up as both 1804 and 1809, and I didn't know which one was correct. I found their headstone and the date was on there. I've got to believe that the headstone isn't wrong, and at least it's more likely to be right than these two conflicting people, I guess, were putting their information in there. But another thing too, when I went and did a search on Google for some family members, I pulled up a blog of family history, and it happened to be a third cousin of mine. I didn't know until I pulled up the blog, and I left a message for this person, and we started correspondence. So I not only found information about my family history, but I met a third cousin, and we actually email each other now. So there's that. So those are my 4 tips on doing family history. So we have a few other things to show you. This is my mother's wedding dress from 1945. She wasn't very big, and I'm sure this dress is handmade. And look at it, all that detail there, and in the shoulders. That's crazy. And people should take care of it. That's my parents' wedding picture, so you can see her actually wearing it. My dad's not very tall. I'm sure my mom had heels on, but I think when she died, she was all of 5 foot, and she might have topped out at about 5'3", so it shows you how tall my dad was. And then you gotta love the pinstripe suit from the 1940s. I don't know how well it's going to show up since it's navy blue, but it's pretty cool. It's got the pants in there with the cuffs. So, didn't have a vest. Didn't they used to wear vests? I don't know. Anywho, that's pretty cool. And then there's these pleated pants that I'm guessing they're probably from about the 1940s too. And if you're wondering why my parents still had clothes like that, my dad didn't get rid of a lot. Not that he was a hoarder. That wasn't even, but he didn't acquire a lot of things, or he didn't require a lot of things. My dad just didn't really care about things. He cared about money. He didn't want to lose his money for anything, but he was very meticulous about his record keeping, and he kept, when he died in 2001, we found old payment stubs from when he paid his utility bills clear back to the 1940s. I almost had a hard time throwing them away just because they seemed like they were antiques, but there was a point where you had to say, I can't be on an episode of Hoarders. I just can't do that with them. So we tossed all that, and then this coat, we have too, and we have other things. There's more clothes that they kept in an old wardrobe. This you may not be able to see well either. I don't know what that is in there. It's an old, really kind of a forest green coat. I'm guessing it was my mom's. Anyways, it's nice and heavy though.
Show them the sleeves.
And,
the end of the sleeves.
Look at those buttons on there, isn't it? Those are really cool. They almost look antique-y. Look like, I'm sure it wasn't a very expensive coat. My parents weren't ever rich, but this is really, really cool, and it's very heavy. This is a shotgun from World War II, actually. It's a Nazi Germany shotgun, but it isn't really worth a whole lot. Okay, what?
Just back up a little tiny bit, thank you.
Okay, it's not worth a whole lot because there have been parts replaced on it, so it's not totally authentic, but there are, most of it is from World War II, but this is, the really cool part of it is it's an all leather case, and it's original. So anyways, this belongs to my brother, actually. He inherited it when my parents died, but he has small kids in the house, so we keep it here. And so that's just a few other things we have. We may come up upon some more stuff. And you guys were really nice to say you like stories, and so I'm going to share a story about my great-grandfather on my mom's side. In 1899, he and his neighbor were having fights over water rights, and it'd been ongoing back and forth. And one day, my great-grandmother was at the house too, and she answered the door. Somebody knocked on the door, hence the answering of it. And so she had eye problems, glaucoma or something was going on, though she was still young, because she still had 5 little kids, but she couldn't clearly see who was at the door. And so the person asked for my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather went to the door, and it was the neighbor, and the neighbor ended up shooting my great-grandfather 3 times in the back and killing him. And my grandfather at the time, my mom's dad, was only 5 months old. And then the neighbor went home and told his wife what he had done, and said that somebody would be coming to look for him, and told her what he had done, and that he had to leave before they got him. And then he went out to the barn and ended up killing himself, shooting himself. So my great-grandmother just felt like at that point that 2 families had been devastated. There was no reason to make this an issue. It happened. She needed to be there for her kids. She was still here, and they needed to she needed to raise her kids the best she could and not have hard feelings with the neighbor. That lady and her kids were all devastated too, and they needed to move past it. And she didn't want to have hard feelings with the wife. It wasn't the wife's fault. She didn't do it. It was the husband, and there was a fight between the 2 husbands, not between them. So they stayed in good relations and helped each other, and they just felt like 2 people had lost a big part of their families that day. And so she never really talked about it, never really told her kids or grandkids about it. And one day, this is 25 years later, her granddaughter came home from school and was just really upset. She was about 16, 17 years old, and apparently they had been talking in school that day about feuds and water rights and different things that happen in small communities, and she still lived fairly close to this community where it happened. And she said, she told her mother she was really upset because she said the teacher pointed her out and said, that happened to your grandfather. He was killed by his neighbor over water rights, and she had never ever heard the story. And so she was upset that she didn't know anything about it. So my great-grandmother decided at that point, for posterity, that she would write the story down. So, because she was the only witness. She was in the house. She was the person who answered the door. She was the one who was nearest when it all happened. So she was the only one who had the best version of what actually happened and how it went down. So she finally wrote it down. So, and it's still a big deal in this small community today. I met a man a few years ago who, in a different city, not even in the same state, who, when I found out his last name, I knew the name, and I told him, and he was from this small town, and so we were comparing family, because I'm actually related to some people with his last name, though he and I weren't related, and I told him who my great-grandfather was, and he said, Edie, my dad would like to meet you. When I was a small boy, he took me over to where that murder happened and told me the story, and it's still a big deal over there over 100 years later. So not too long ago, just in the last year, I was getting my hair cut, and I got talking to the girl. She was probably in her early 20s, and she asked, you know, you make small talk. She asked where I lived, and I told her the name of the little town I was in, and she says, oh, I love little towns. I grew up in a little town. And I said, oh, what little town? And she told me the name of the town, and I said, oh, I've got lots of ancestry over there, and told her a couple of my family names, and she had heard of them. And then I said, in fact, my great-grandfather was shot and killed by his neighbor over water rights, but it was a long time ago. But she said, and then told me her last name, which is the same last name of the man who shot and killed my great-grandfather. And I don't know if she was a direct descendant or if he was like a great-great-uncle or something like that. But we just kind of chuckled at how small of a world it was. And like I told her, it didn't affect me. It's just a good story in my family history, but it did affect my grandfather. My grandfather was 5 months old when his dad died. He never knew him. And my grandpa lived to be 97 years old, and I was well into my 30s when my grandfather died, so I really knew my grandfather, though I never had any association with the people involved in the original story. But it affected him his entire life to have not had his father in his life. In the last few years of his life, he kept telling my mom and her siblings and other people that he felt it was time to go back home. He wanted to see his dad. He was anxious to see his dad again. So those are the kinds of stories we have. I've got tons of family histories, so we'll share more. We won't stick on this for a long time, but since you guys were so kind and said you liked it, we thought we'd share a little more. And I've got more stories, so we'll work on some recipes and we'll work on some other things. We're trying to come up with a way to go traveling this year. If that works out, we'll take you on that trip too, but we'll bring back some more family history too. So thanks a lot.